In 1953, Watson and Crick published the double helix structure of DNA, and humanity finally believed we understood ourselves. But more than 70 years later, geneticists are still standing in front of a question with no clean answer. Why does the human genome carry features that exist in no other primate species, with zero intermediate evolutionary stages to explain how we got there? What makes this even stranger is that the answer may have already been written on clay tablets in what is now Iraq more than 5,000 years ago. Not as mythology, as a procedure. Before we go any further, drop one word in the comments right now. Do you think human origins are best explained by evolution, intervention, or too early to conclude? Just pick one. I will read every single one. Here is what most people get wrong about ancient texts. We read them like fairy tales. We assume that because the people who wrote them did not have microscopes or gene sequencers, everything they described must be symbolic, poetic, or imagined. That assumption may be costing us the most important discovery in human history. Let me lay out 3 layers of a problem that has been building quietly for decades. Layer 1 is on the surface. The Sumerians, one of the oldest civilizations we have ever documented, left behind thousands of clay tablets describing in precise and procedural language how a group of advanced beings created modern humans through a biological process, not through magic, through a step-by-step method involving genetic material. Layer 2 goes deeper. Modern genetics has uncovered a growing list of anomalies in the human genome. Features that appear suddenly without clear precursors and that separate us from every other species on this planet in ways that 1 or 2% of DNA difference simply cannot explain. Layer 3 is where it gets uncomfortable. When you place these 2 bodies of evidence side by side, the Sumerian accounts and the genomic data, they are not pointing in opposite directions. They are pointing at the same gap. Today we are going to decode what the Sumerians actually wrote, examine what the genetic data actually shows, and explore whether these 2 completely separate bodies of knowledge might be describing the same event from different angles. Let us be precise about the source material, because this matters for everything that follows. The Atrahasis Epic and the Enuma Elish are not fringe documents. They are among the most studied texts in all of ancient history, translated and analyzed by mainstream scholars, including Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer at the University of Pennsylvania, widely considered one of the leading Sumerologists of the 20th century. Inside these texts, there is a term that appears repeatedly, Lulu Amelu. In Sumerian, this translates most accurately as primitive worker. The tablets describe a deliberate creation event in which beings called the Anunnaki, presented as a ruling class with advanced knowledge, worked through 2 figures named Enki and Ninhursag to produce a new kind of being capable of labor, language, and complex instruction. Now here is where the language stops sounding like mythology and starts sounding like something else entirely. The tablets describe 14 surrogates carrying the new beings to term. They describe multiple failed attempts before success. They describe the combining of existing biological material with something introduced from outside. The Epic of Atrahasis specifically states, according to scholarly translations, that the process involved mixing clay, which many researchers now interpret as base biological material, with the essence of a divine being. Scholars like Kramer have noted for decades that the procedural specificity of these accounts is unusual for creation mythology. Most ancient cultures describe human origins with sweeping magical gestures. The Sumerian account reads more like documentation. The question worth asking is this: if this was purely symbolic storytelling, why does the structure of the narrative so closely resemble what we would today call in vitro fertilization combined with surrogacy? That is not a conclusion. That is a question the data forces us to sit with. This is where we move from ancient texts into hard science, and the data here is sourced from peer-reviewed research, not speculation. Data point 1. Humans and chimpanzees share between 98 and 99% of their DNA. That is a fact confirmed by the Smithsonian Institution's Human Origins Program and supported by decades of comparative genomics. But here is what that number does not explain. No other primate species has produced abstract language, symbolic art, mathematics, or the capacity to question its own existence. A difference of 1 to 2% in DNA is responsible for all of that. Geneticists openly acknowledge this gap is disproportionate and, as of today, not fully explained. Data point 2. Human chromosome 2 is unique among all primates. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans all carry 48 chromosomes. Humans carry 46. The scientific explanation, confirmed through research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and reaffirmed as recently as 2024, is that 2 ancestral chromosomes fused end-to-end at some point in human prehistory, leaving behind vestigial telomeric sequences at an interior location where they should not exist. This fusion is documented. What remains debated is how such a significant chromosomal event happened, how quickly it spread through a population, and what drove it. Data point 3. In 2021, a landmark study published in Nature identified more than 130,000 regions of the human genome that were previously dismissed as junk DNA. These regions turned out to have active regulatory functions. They are not leftover noise. They are switches. And a subsequent paper in Genome Biology and Evolution concluded, in its own words, that the days of junk DNA are over. The question that lingers is why such an elaborate regulatory architecture exists in a genome that supposedly evolved through random mutation and natural selection alone. Data point 4. Geneticist Evan Eichler at the University of Washington has described specific duplication blocks in the human genome as, and this is a direct reference to his published work, a missing piece of human evolution. These blocks appear in patterns that do not follow standard evolutionary progression. They are concentrated, purposeful-looking, and linked to the rapid expansion of human brain capacity. None of these data points prove anything on their own, but taken together, they form a pattern that mainstream science has not yet fully accounted for. Here's the twist that makes this more than just a collection of interesting facts. The oldest remains of anatomically modern Homo sapiens date to approximately 315,000 years ago, based on fossil evidence from Morocco. Encyclopedia Britannica, in its entry on human evolution, states plainly that scientists have been unable to detect the sudden moment of evolution for any species. But in the human case, the leap is particularly abrupt. Language, symbolic thinking, and cognitive complexity appear in the archaeological record without a clear, gradual buildup. By geological timescales, it happens almost overnight. Every other species we have studied evolves its most defining traits slowly, over millions of years, with clearly traceable intermediate stages. The human transition from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens does not follow that pattern. Now place that alongside the Sumerian account. The tablets describe a process that produced a new class of being with enhanced capacity for communication and complex task execution, created through biological combination rather than natural reproduction. The timing that scholars associate with the Lulu Amelu narrative aligns, at least within the broad strokes of prehistory, with the period of our species' most dramatic and unexplained leap forward. This is the point where the analysis has to be honest about what it is and what it is not. We are not saying the Sumerians had electron microscopes. We are not saying the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials. What we are saying is this. The Sumerians described a biological intervention using the only vocabulary they had. And when you strip away the theological language and look at the procedural structure underneath, it describes something that genetics has now confirmed actually happened in the human genome, even if the cause remains officially unknown. That is not a conspiracy. That is a convergence. Let us go one level deeper, because there are 2 additional data points that rarely make it into mainstream coverage of this topic. First, approximately 8% of the human genome is made up of endogenous retroviruses. These are sequences from ancient viral infections that integrated themselves into the DNA of our ancestors and were passed down through generations. A study published in the journal Cell in 2018 confirmed that some of these viral sequences are not dormant. They are actively involved in brain development and immune function. In other words, external biological material embedded itself into our genome and became part of what makes us human. This is not a fringe claim. This is documented virology. And it raises a genuinely interesting question. If a virus can rewrite human DNA with enough precision to influence cognition, what does that tell us about the theoretical upper limit of biological intervention in our genome? Second, the missing link problem is not solved. Despite well over a century of searching, we have not found a fossil record that smoothly and continuously connects Homo erectus to modern Homo sapiens. The transition remains, in the honest language of paleoanthropology, abrupt. Researchers use words like punctuated equilibrium to describe evolutionary leaps that happen faster than the standard model predicts. That is a technical term for something that moved faster than we can fully explain. The Sumerians called the moment of creation the shaping of the Lulu. Science calls the same general window a population bottleneck with anomalous genomic changes. The language is completely different. The timeline and the structural description are uncomfortably similar. Let us be direct here, because intellectual honesty is the only thing that makes this conversation worth having. Does the evidence prove that ancient astronauts engineered the human species? No. That conclusion requires far more than what the current data supports, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling you something. Does the evidence prove that the Sumerians had literal knowledge of genetics? Not in any way we can verify. What the evidence does support, clearly and without requiring any leap of faith, is the following. The human genome contains features that are genuinely unusual and not yet fully explained by standard evolutionary theory. A chromosomal fusion event occurred in our lineage that is unique among primates. Regions of our DNA that were dismissed for decades are turning out to be functional and sophisticated. Our most defining cognitive traits appeared faster than the evolutionary record can cleanly account for. And separately, one of the oldest literate civilizations in human history wrote about a deliberate biological creation process, using language specific enough to describe surrogacy, iterative experimentation, and the combination of genetic material, 3,000 years before Christ. Here is our own read on this, and it is a hypothesis, not a verdict. The most likely explanation is not extraterrestrial. It is that we have fundamentally underestimated what early humans were capable of observing, recording, and understanding. The Sumerians may have witnessed or inherited knowledge of something real, an unusual event in human biological history, and encoded it in the theological framework that was available to them. The gods were not necessarily divine. They may have been a class of humans, or a branch of hominids, with knowledge that others did not have. That is still an extraordinary claim. But it is a far less extraordinary claim than the alternative, which is that two completely unrelated bodies of evidence, separated by 5,000 years, just happen to describe the same biological anomaly by coincidence. Before we close, here are 3 things worth carrying out of this conversation, regardless of where you land on the larger question. Lesson 1. The way we read ancient texts shapes what we can learn from them. If we approach every pre-scientific document as mythology by default, we are not being rational, we are being lazy. The Sumerians operated without the vocabulary of modern science, but they were systematic observers. That deserves a more careful kind of reading. Lesson 2. The human genome is still, by any honest scientific measure, not fully understood. As of 2023, researchers at John Maddox's lab, publishing through Taylor and Francis, described our current understanding of non-coding DNA as a paradigm shift in progress. We are still in the middle of figuring out what our own DNA does. That should make all of us more humble about what we think we know. Lesson 3. The question of human origins is the most open question in science. Not the most answered, the most open. And the fact that it remains open means the conversation we had today is not fringe entertainment. It is legitimate inquiry. Now, here is what I want to leave you with. If the Sumerian tablets are even partially accurate in their description of human biological origins, then those same tablets contain detailed accounts of what their creators intended for the humans they made, what role they were designed to play, and what was supposed to come next. That part of the text is significantly darker and significantly more specific. We will get into that in the next video. If you made it this far, you already know you are the kind of person who wants the full picture. Subscribe so you do not miss the second half of this story. And if you dropped your word in the comments at the beginning, scroll back up. I genuinely want to know where you landed.